everyone. I am going to be doing a video lecture on a number of things in order to catch up, but I'm going to be focusing on mostly APA and the annotated bibliography assignment that is part of Module 5, but I am also going to touch on the readings from Module 4 and Module 5, and I'm going to intersperse my discussion of the readings with some other things. So I'll be doing kind of talking about the readings, but then also doing some instruction throughout my discussion of the readings. So as you can see here, Module 4, you had to read chapters 5, 23, and 24, and then for this week, you were focusing on chapters 10 and 21. So I'm going to start with the first one, as I always do, chapter 5. This one is on research strategies. And this particular chapter focused on something that you guys did, which was the locating sources and evaluating sources. So, how do you locate a credible source, and then how do you evaluate a credible source? And that's something that was an exercise that you had to do, and then I've graded that assignment. So page 72 from this chapter is, I think, important because it delineates how to evaluate a source. And evaluating a source is not the easiest thing to do in terms of, even if you have a scholarly source, it might not be helpful for the particular thing that you're writing. And everything that you're doing right now, all of these assignments and all of these particular readings, they're all leading up to you writing actual research papers where you integrate sources. So that's why there's all this focus on sources, and you've been kind of dabbling in it a little bit, with the previous assignments where you had to locate not only the scholarly source, but then you had to locate the source on the web. And then with the annotated bibliography, you're being asked to locate a number of sources that are going to be about a specific topic that you want to address in a longer paper for the course. So, and on page 72, the things that our author gives that are useful, and she has them in this grid if you choose to look at it. But, again, it's a heuristic. It's asking questions. So when was the source published? And usually a benchmark is the past 10 years is considered better, I should say, unless you're somebody like me, who I work in 16th and 17th century literature. It's, there's sometimes where I have to use a source that's somebody writing about those texts that was written in 1902 or 1950, but then I also have to have sources that are the most recent. So the most recent sources, and particularly ones published in the past 10 years, are considered, a best practice when selecting sources, because they tend to, and it's not always the case, but in theory, they're meant to have the most up-to-date information or up-to-date conversations or arguments about a particular topic. And when you're talking about science or engineering or aeronautical subjects, these are subjects that probably have a much quicker turnaround in terms of what people are saying about things than, say, somebody in my field, which is literature, where things are more slow to move because it's not based on technology, so or human factors. So the date of the publication is important. Also, who is the author? And this is something that you guys this should all sound familiar. But you want to know who's writing. So, and that's why I always recommend Googling the author or authors, just to have an idea of who they are. What's their expertise? Do they have the credibility and the ethos to be writing on whatever it is they're writing? The other thing is, what press or internet venue published the work? And this is basically saying the medium. Where was the thing published? So was it published on a blog? Was it published on, in a newspaper, online? Was it published in a paper newspaper? Was it published in a scholarly journal? So you just want to know the medium of where the publication is taking place. The next one is, does the publication itself project a strong bias? So bias is always a complicated topic because everything is or should have an argument, and so that in itself is bias. However, the way writers go about addressing bias is what the issue is. So if somebody is writing like, this thing is totally wrong, and they're very aggressive about it, and they're very aggressive about, my particular opinion is better and best, and they just kind of are very aggressive in the way they take their stance, and they can do that in a variety of ways. That's where that's like a red flag. So that diminishes a writer's ethos, because even though they may have an argument, they're not approaching the argument in a way that's effective, or even one that may allow dialogue to take place. So you really want, even though all of the scholarly journals and a lot of the articles online that you should be or will be collecting for your annotated bib, and they all have arguments, you want them to be approaching their arguments, as quote unquote objectively as they can, and that takes place at the level of the writing. And then the last thing that our author mentions is the subject matter treated in a fair and balanced manner. It's sort of similar to the previous thing about bias, but it's really about making sure that things aren't taken out of context, or that a subject matter is given the necessary treatment or necessary discussion. It's not just kind of tossed around without thought, or it's mostly about making sure that even if somebody has an issue with something, or they're not really convinced about what they're writing about, or they don't really maybe fully understand it, they're still doing the best that they can in order to make sure that they're quote unquote objectively addressing it in a fair and balanced way, rather than just saying, I'm right, I'm not going to give any sources that suggest the opposite, you're just going to have to take my word for it, end of story, the end, goodbye. So very similar to the idea of bias, just kind of at that sentence level. So that is mostly what chapter 5 talks about, are these research strategies, and it goes into in depth about primary and secondary research. So, and something that I'm going to bring it up now, but I'll return to it. I have a lot of things open for you guys. Here it is. Nope, it's not that. Sorry. This is what happens when you have too many things open. You can never find anything. Maybe it's already open. It is. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to make my life easier, and then I forget about it. Okay, this I have here. I've copied the annotated bibliography assignment from Canvas, and then I've added my own things down here. But what I wanted to show you here is the locating the resources. So we call them sources, resources, evidence. They're all the same thing. But sorry, this should say the Hence library databases. Sometimes I repurpose information and I forget to change the names of things. So I've named 4, and I've given you 2 names before. I've given you Academic OneFile and JSTOR before. I've given 2 other ones. Nexus Uni, which used to be LexisNexis, and then Sage Journals, where you can locate those scholarly sources. So when you're looking at the criteria for the annotated bibliography assignment, you'll see here the types of sources that you need to have for this assignment. So you need the 7 sources. They all need to be about a particular subject. It's not a prescribed subject, so you guys are choosing the topic. If you have questions about choosing a topic, please let me know. That's also not a very easy thing to do, because a lot of times students might choose topics that are too broad. So the narrower the topic, the better. But you need at least 2 articles from 1 or more databases via the Hunt Library, and at least one of them needs to be scholarly. So you need to go to the Hunt Library databases again, and then locate 2 articles at least. I honestly would recommend locating the majority of them from there, but you don't have to. And at least one of them has to be scholarly, and the other one, what they're saying, can be substantive. And I've talked before about the differences between substantive and scholarly. And then, and then the rest of the articles, if you don't want to find them, or you can't in the Hunt Library databases, then you'll find substantive articles online that aren't through the databases in the Hunt Library. And then just to show you, so I'm just going to go into the Hunt Library really quickly. And I've written about this on how to search, but when you go to the Hunt Library interface, you want to go to the research databases here. This is a lot of students from, doesn't matter what the institution is, it's not letting me go back. There we go. They'll just start typing things in here, or they'll go to articles and start typing things in there. And you can do that, but to me that's too broad of a search. I like things to be really specific and narrow, because it's more easily contained. So that's why I recommend searching by the databases. So and if you're confused about what databases are, these are all different databases. So, it's got them alphabetized up here, but each of these represents a different database, and then within that database are, all of the different articles. So some of them are substantive, and then some of them are scholarly, and then sometimes you'll have other types of sources in there depending on what it is. So I've recommended Academic OneFile before, so I would encourage you to continue using that database. I've also again recommended JSTOR, which is a very standard database. It has a ton of, it says full text business periodicals. That's a really bad description of what JSTOR is. Don't read the descriptions a lot on these. They're not always the best, but it's not just business periodicals. And periodicals are just things that are published periodically. I'm going to go and open up JSTOR really quickly, and hopefully won't make me do the dual authentication. There we go. So when you're in JSTOR, what I said before is you don't just want this one field box. I think that's what it's called, search box. You want to go to advanced search, because this gives you more search opportunities, and everything in JSTOR is scholarly. So there's not going to be a button that says I only want scholarly or peer-reviewed sources. And what I've said before is, but you do want to constrain the medium that you're getting, or the format, and that's articles. You don't want books. Reviews are reviews of books, so those don't count. Sometimes if students don't choose articles, they'll find a review, but you can't use the review, even though it's in a scholarly journal. It doesn't count as a resource. And then there's research reports, pamphlets, and then I've never known what miscellaneous is. I've never tried to look. And then from there you would put your different, you can see what these are different things I've taught in the past. But you would put your search terms in here, and then however many you have. The best way to, well, I would say, I don't know if it's the best way, but now I have to get back to that other document. Sorry, you're going to have to bear with me while I go back and forth between all these documents I've opened. So when doing research, it's best to start out broad and then get more narrow. And this has to do with the keywords that you use. So I don't know any engineering or aeronautical things. Sorry. I wish I did, because then I could do a keyword search on that for you. But say, I'll just make something up. It's probably not true. But say I wanted to know something about airline safety and the English language. So if I put in here airline safety and English language, I might not get a whole lot of stuff back. I might just say English, actually. And if we search that and get, okay, I'm getting some things that might be relevant, but then it's up to me at that point to kind of look through each one and then figure out, okay, even though the title might allude to it, or even if it doesn't allude to it, it may be about something that really isn't what I want to write my paper about, or isn't something that I'm really interested in focusing on for the particular paper. So even once you go through the first, you have to find the keywords that work. That can be a lengthy process. It's not just keyword. Oh, look, I found my sources. You don't just want to choose the first one and then presume that that's going to be helpful for you. That's not a good way of doing it. You need to kind of go through the process numerous times before you find different things. So going back to the databases, the other two I suggested were Nexus Uni, which I've never looked at this since they changed from LexisNexis to Nexus Uni. But I imagine it looks a little bit like Academic OneFile, because those tend to look sort of the same. And then while that's opening, because it's taking a while, the other one was Sage Journals, and that's this one. So this one is, again, whenever you have the option for advanced search, I would use it, just because, again, that gives you more search options. It might look overwhelming, but you don't have to use all of the options. It just gives you more things to search with, particularly keywords. And this is nice because it gives an explanation of the different types of Boolean searches that you can do. And then Sage Journals. Let me go back to Nexus Uni, actually. I just wanted to look and see something really quickly, but it looks to be okay. Sage Journals. When you see the word open access, and I saw it when I did the search for this, like this says open access. So open access is a type of publication. It's no different. It can still be scholarly. There's just a movement in scholarly publications to have open access. That means that there's not a monetary firewall that prevents people from being able to read the information. So, like, you have, like, modern Asian studies, you have access to this journal article because the library and ERAU has a subscription and pays for you to be able to read this. Open access is a movement that things are published without cost, so you can just look at them freely. So it does present difficulties in evaluation of, if something is published in an open access format, is it still as credible as one that is behind a paywall, firewall, or just a paywall. So these are the different those are the 4 different, and see, and I'm giving you that because it says open access content only. I don't know why you'd want only open access. I understand why you want access. And having full access means, and this is a common thing that you can check, it means that you'll have access to the entire article. So there's times when it might throw a citation back at you to say, this article exists, but Embry-Riddle doesn't subscribe to this journal, so you can't have it because they didn't pay for it. In that case, you can request Embry-Riddle to get it for you, and they will. It takes a little bit more time, but if you're in a bind or a time crunch, I recommend doing, the ones to which you have full access, because then you don't have to go through the process of requesting them to send you an article. Okay, so those are the databases. If you're struggling in finding sources, just let me know. Some of you have been sending me things, is this an okay source? And I think that's a good thing to do. So please feel free to send me things in the meantime. The other thing about research is we have, and you guys have already talked about this in the beginning of the term when we talked about how do you, how you write, writing exercise that everybody did. But you want to know the differences between informal versus formal research. So informal research is, and I think a lot of you already know what it is basically, but informal research is the type of research you do I'm just going to write it first. I guess I'll just call them authors. So it's when you kind of have an idea of what you want to research, but you're not completely clear of what, even if you have an idea of the topic or you've done work on the topic before, it's always still a good idea to do informal research, because you need to know what other people are saying about it. Like, what is the general, and then we call the broad terrain, or I sometimes it's called the critical terrain, but that's more for formal research. But in general, what's the landscape? What does the conversational landscape look like for this topic? And you can do that through things like Wikipedia, just Googling, looking at what different people are saying. And sometimes you'll start to see patterns. So, okay, people are always bringing this up, or they're, these particular people, like that's why I said key authors. These particular people are always mentioned, which means that they're what we call foundational to this particular topic. So informal research is really valuable, even though we don't want people quoting from like Wikipedia, like your instructions say, or other kind of less than substantive type of work. It's still a good idea to wrap your head around and get a grasp on what that broad terrain looks like. And then once you do that, you should be more comfortable in theory doing the formal research, which is research in finding more credible sources, like in, the scholarly peer-reviewed sources. So that's the formal research, and the formal research should really churn out the sources that you use, not only like in your annotated bibliography, but in your academic writing. Is you always want to have the best, most credible sources, because you want those good sources, because having good sources generates ethos for yourself as a writer. So that's everything really from chapter 5. I can't figure out my indentation. Okay, so going on to chapter 23, this is the revision and editing chapter. This is a very common topic, and it's common because students tend to not know the difference between revision and editing. And that's, sorry, I'm just moving my book around. I've got my notes here. So our author says everything that I would say about revision and editing. With revision, if we think about the word revision, you're re-envisioning your paper or your project, whatever it might be. So you are rethinking what, and I've called the HOCs, the higher order concerns. Those are what we call the HOCs, such as organization, which is where paragraphs are placed, your thesis, argument, the types, I don't think that's a word, the types of evidence you integrate, etc. So that's revision. And she talks about the importance of, I think it's on page 406, being willing to let go. And that's really hard to do, especially when you're writing shorter papers. But being willing to let go is a difficult thing to do, but you have to challenge yourself to say, what's really necessary in this paper. And I know I've crafted this whole thing, but it can be better. And how can I make it better? Like, I know I spent a lot of time on it, but a lot of it's got to get changed in order for it to get better. So that's revision. It's not easy, but it takes practice to learn. And I'm going to be using my own example. I think this is it here. And I'm also, when I talk about APA, I'm going to turn this article of mine into APA format to do a short lecture on APA. But and revision also has to do with something that our author has talked about before and something that I've tried to emphasize, which is that idea of recursivity, which is going back and back and back to consider how effective your writing or project is. So revision really emphasizes that recursivity, and Word only has a limited dictionary, so it doesn't have the word recursivity in it. That's why it's red under there. But recursivity is crucial to revision. And then our author talks about having the commitment, if I could spell that right, to your work being the best that it can. And so, and that's because revision, like I said, is not easy, because you do have to do a lot of work. What I've experienced in the past, and this is a bad practice, is that student writers will, write a draft and then only fix a few things and think that is revision, and it's not. And so, and it's really hard, even when, like, I would give substantial feedback, they would still not take that feedback and reflect on it to think, how can I, okay, I'm being told that, my instructor doesn't understand why this paragraph is here, and then when I get the revised draft, the paragraph is still where it was. So it's kind of like, well, what happened? So it's not just fixing a few things. And the other thing that I always have to remind students about is revision is something that is mostly student-centered, which means that I provide feedback, but my feedback is not limiting. And what that means is revision cannot just be a simple response to what I have provided in terms of feedback. And this means that if I were to give feedback on everything that can be changed about a paper, it would take me way too long to give feedback on papers. The benchmark for providing feedback on papers is 15 minutes. So that means that an instructor is expected to spend 15 minutes and no more on giving feedback to student writing. So what that means is it's up to the student to take what the instructor has said in that 15 minutes and then apply that to all of the paper. So I might make a comment on a higher order concern in one paragraph. I see the same issue in the third paragraph. I'm not going to rewrite that comment. So it's up to you, the student, to take that comment, go through your own work, and fix it. So that's not my job to point out every single little thing, because I don't have the time. So, and it's also not helpful because the student needs to be doing more independent work and independent thinking. That's the whole purpose of revision. Okay, and then editing is about those lower order concerns, or the locks. And this is what you do at the very end. It's the sentence level, stuff. So punctuation, I hate the word grammar, but there it is, grammar. Syntax, this is the way words are ordered. Just the polish of the paper or project. It's just that nice finish you put on the end. And I try not to make a lot of comments on things that are edited or editing, but I will occasionally point something out. Like I might point it out like once to draw your attention to it, but then I'm relying on you to take that note and then apply it to the rest of your paper. So I'm not going to point out every time a comma is used incorrectly. I am going to be doing a grammar video lecture on commas, semicolons, colons, subordinating and coordinating conjunctions. This is something I'm doing for my literature class, but I'm going to give the same video for this class as well, because, and what I've told my literature students is that there's a lot of grammar that I can lecture about, but the comma, semicolons, colons, subordinating and coordinating conjunctions, I think are some of the most important things to pay attention to in writing, because this all has to do with how you put sentences and thoughts together. So if you have, there's things like hyphens and N dashes and M dashes and possessives with apostrophes and syntax, wordiness or editing for concision, I would say, would come after the commas, semicolons, and colons. But this, I think, if you're going to learn any grammar, like punctuation, this is what you want to learn, because if you don't do these things correctly, that's the quickest way grammatically that your work becomes difficult to understand for your reader. You can have some wordiness in there, and yeah, it's annoying for the reader, but if all of this is correct, they can still get the meaning out of it. If you have a possessive wrong, it can be confusing, but your reader can still make sense out of it. So that's a video lecture that's coming. Our author does take you through a variety of editing / grammar related thing in that chapter, in chapter 23. And you can definitely look at those, but I'm also going to focus on some very specific grammar. Okay, so I'm going to move on to chapter 24. And this one was specific to that, what I feel like is a really frustrating assignment for me and everybody else, that peer review assignment, which isn't the last time you're doing peer review in the class. I believe you have it one more time. But it's peer and instructor review is chapter 24. And the most important thing I found from this is on page 425, and it emphasizes that peer reviewers, i.e. you guys, when you're responding to each other's papers, are expected to respond as readers. So I've done a lot of research on peer feedback and across the years, and students tend to believe that they don't have the expertise or authority to provide apt feedback, but this is not the case. So instructor feedback is one thing you can expect from the instructor, and students always tend to resist peer feedback because they're like, well, I should just get feedback from the instructor because they're the person that's going to be grading me. And yeah, that's true to an extent, but that doesn't mean that there's not value in your peers providing feedback for you. And providing feedback is its own type of writing, and it's not easy. Believe me, I do it all day when I'm giving feedback to students. But it's hard sometimes to get students to get on board with the fact that you do have something valuable to say about your peers' writing because you yourself are doing that same assignment. So you have some expectations as to what should be in your peers' paper or your peers' project. So you may not, give the same type of feedback that an instructor would give, but you're not clueless. You're a different set of eyes, which is in itself a good thing, and then you have some expertise because, like I said, you yourself are writing that assignment. I'm not writing these assignments, so you offer a different perspective on someone's paper than I might have, and sometimes I might say the same thing you say. So it's the peer and instructor review. This is really, it seemed to me this chapter felt very much like a trying to persuade students that you as a peer have something meaningful to say, and I completely agree with our author on that. It's just a matter of convincing students, and like I said, getting on board with that idea can sometimes be a struggle for instructors. And then on page 427, she talks about formative feedback, and this I thought, I'm going to turn to that page really quickly, or as quickly as I can. But the formative feedback is really the type of feedback that I try to provide, because this has to do with feedback in the form of questions rather than statements. Statements tend to not be considered the most valuable type of feedback. And then descriptive remarks, about how the writing may be read, so how would the reader respond? And that's why I use the phrase, as a reader. I tend to use that phrase a lot. And I encourage, when you're giving reviews, to do that, because it provides a little bit of distance. So you're not saying you, right, or me, but it's, as a reader, this is my interpretation. This is what I'm thinking that you want to say, but is this actually what you want to say? Because you said that you were going to be arguing this, but you're saying this. So as your reader, I'm a little confused. So the formative feedback is the best type of feedback. And I also have, and I wish I would have given this to you guys earlier, but I will be posting it on Canvas because, like I said, you should be doing, I think, another assignment on peer review. But this is a feedback schematic. And in face-to-face classes, I actually have students work directly with this, and then they assess what types of feedback they provide. But this takes people through what are different types of feedback and things like, so over here, the code, pointing, advising, those are not helpful types of feedback. So this is basically where you say, like, you point at something in the writing and you say, like, that's not good, and it's like, okay, why? So it's just not helpful to the writer to get things like that. The best type of things are questioning, which are, it's right. The reviewer attempts to challenge the writer in some way. That's the type of feedback I try to make the most of. It takes the most time, so it's frustrating, but it tends to be, and sometimes it's frustrating for the writer, for the student as well, because they're like, why are you challenging me? Just tell me what to do. But it's in terms of composition and revision, it's the type of thing that we want to do when we're providing feedback. And the other really helpful, but also takes a lot of time, is the collaborating. I think it should be called modeling because that's essentially what it is. And this is where you provide the writer some type of thing that, here's how you might want to revise this, and here's a model of it. And that's very helpful feedback because it provides the writer with an idea of, okay, that might help me rethink how I want to write this. So it's the same idea as modeling. So I will provide you with the feedback schematic because it will come in handy when you're doing your next feedback assignment. Okay, that's all of the Module 4 readings. So now I'm going to move on to the Module 5 readings. And there was just 2 of them. Chapter 10 was the first one, and this is on the annotated bibliography. It's one of my favorite things to teach. It's one of students' least favorite thing to do. But at least that's my history with it. So the annotated bibliography, the chapter takes you through what an annotated bibliography is and how to kind of do it. I'm going to talk a little bit about it as well. I'm going to talk about the assignment, and then I'm going to show you some examples and then talk about the grading of it, and tell you where students tend to have the most problems. But first I want to go to your actual assignment. So we already talked about the type of sources that you should have, and they tell you, right, don't use Wikipedia. You need to have the annotation for each source. So it's called an annotated bibliography because, okay, we're working with APA in this class. So normally when you have a research paper, you would have a references page at the end of it. So a references page is just a bibliography, right? So an annotated bibliography is just a bibliography that's been annotated. And annotated just means that you've taken notes on a source. So it just means that you're providing notes about every source that you have for your sources that you have for your particular assignment. So that's what an annotated bibliography is. I never did one until I was actually in graduate school, so I often feel sorry for undergraduates who are doing it because I never had to do it, although I think it's a really valuable thing. It's a really valuable genre, but it's really weird if you've never done one before. Right, this assignment cannot be revised. You need to do it in APA, and then there's an example that's provided for you. But before that, right, the actual annotation. So you have the APA citation, and then you have the annotation below the citation, and then you just stack those. So you have citation, annotation, citation, annotation, citation, annotation, and you do that for all 7 sources. And then it gives you an example, right? So it did tell you to put your subject, like I think this subject is way too broad. I didn't write this, but I would make it more specific than homeschooling, because that's a big battlefield of sources. And then you can see that there's a citation. I just copied and pasted it, so the citation, this should be up here. And then there is the annotation that is below here. And it's telling you for the annotations. And this is similar to what you did in your rhetorical analysis. I believe that summary and analysis. Here again, they're calling it evaluation. But you first do the summary and then you do the evaluation. You're just doing it in a much shorter, condensed form. So your short summary, 1 to 3 sentences of the information found in the source, and then you're doing analysis of it. So an eval of credibility, reliability, currency, possible bias, and usefulness with respect to your topic. And just like before, the analysis part is longer than the summary part. So that's, and then you can read through this example. Let me make this a little bit bigger. I added a little bit to this, and I'll give you guys this if you want to look at it, but I do identify some learning outcomes for, like, why do we do annotated bibs, but part of it is identifying APA conventions, and I'll talk more about APA soon. It demonstrates that you can successfully find sources, demonstrate audience awareness, right, writing an academic tone, etc. That you can, and this is your annotation, right, that you can write an annotation, that you can concisely, that's the key word there, summarize, that you can craft summary, and then you can execute analysis, and then illustrating the parts and purpose of a paragraph, right? So you're not mixing the summary and analysis like I've talked about before. Writing appropriate transitional sentences, and obviously always developing skills for writing engaging openings and closings. So those are just some learning outcomes. Here, this is basically just like, this is what it is. It documents the research that you have done. So it's a way to evaluate the depth and breadth of preparation for writing the research essay. And this is why we say that research is a pre-writing activity, because you do annotated bibs before. Not always. I don't when I'm writing anymore, because I've been doing it for so long. But they're really great when you're doing research papers for the first time, because you have to go through that research process, and the annotated bib forces you to do that on a more I would say a slightly more advanced level, rather than just finding sources. It's now asking you to find the sources and then talk about them. Here's the 4 databases that I recommend doing. And then I just have some information about what you want to be doing. So I'm not going to go through it now, because it's nothing, this isn't like new information. I'm just kind of delineating it in a different way. These here, however, might be helpful for you. So I tried to flesh out a little bit more of what your summary and what your evaluative paragraph should do. The most important thing is identifying the thesis and argument. Is the most important thing. I honestly, that's the thing I look for the most in an annotation. It's not easy to do, and students really struggle with it. So you need to make sure that you understand what the actual argument and the actual thesis of the source is. When I see the title of your source, I'm going to expect that there's a certain argument. And even though I haven't read your source, I'll be able to identify whether or not I think what you've given me is the argument or not. So you do want to state that, and you want to state it first. Put that in your first sentence. It's just like the rhetorical précis I gave you. The first thing you do is identify the argument. It's the most important thing. It's the thing I do when I read any work from students is, okay, what's their argument? What's their thesis? And then kind of after that, what are the things that the author does to support their argument? And then the evaluative paragraph, I've given ethos, logos, pathos in here, right? You don't have to directly talk about them. It just gives you a variety of questions of how you might go about providing analysis in the evaluative paragraph of your annotation. So I'll give this to you so you have it. It may or may not be helpful, but it'll just be there for you. Okay, so that's okay. Before I move on to chapter 21, which is another, this is going to be a slightly long video lecture because there's so much important information. But annotated bibliographies, I've never taught one this short, so I have examples, but they're longer than what you guys have to do. So I'm looking for, this is normally when I've taught, and I've taught annotated bibs for about, over 10 years. So normally when students have done this, they've had to write an introductory paragraph, which is what this whole paragraph is at the beginning. And then they get to the actual annotated part. And you can see that there's a citation up here. This is in MLA, not APA. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. And then you can see that there is a long annotation. This is all annotation. This first one is the summary, and the second one is the evaluation. And then we have another citation with another annotation. Another citation with another annotation. Another citation, another annotation. Another citation, other annotation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my the annotated bibs I've always taught in the past have always been this long. But I just wanted to show you, yours will look like maybe something like that or that. It's not that long. But you don't have to do this kind of introductory. This is called a prospectus, which is basically like, this is my topic, and here's why it's an important topic, and here's an argument, and it kind of is a proposal for a research paper, and then followed by here's sources that corroborate that this is actually a topic that I can write about effectively. But that's what an annotated bib looks like, and you do want that space between your citation and annotation. If we see from the example that's provided for you on Canvas, sorry, I'm at a loss for it. I keep mixing up citation and annotation. The citation is here, and then there's a space, and then you have the annotation. I'm actually going to open that up on Canvas so we can see that that it looks prettier. And I should have Canvas open. Here it is. Okay, so if we go to annotated bibliography. Okay, right, so it doesn't show it on the one I had because I just copied and pasted it, but this is an attempt at a hanging indentation, which you need. And then this is also indented. But so some of the formatting questions that are very common with annotated bibliographies are, do I need to double space everything? Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no. In this case, no, don't worry about it. We're just going to go off of what the example is, and that is that it's all single spaced. But you do want that extra space between the citation and the annotation, because that's another question that gets asked a lot. Do I need to have a space? And the answer is there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's really what is preferred by the particular instructor. So, but I'm just going off the example here. So single spaced, making sure you have the extra space between the two. That's how you want to format it. In the sample I showed you, I had them double space it, but then still put that space between the citation and the annotation. So it's just, I've had to write ones where there's no space and it gets really, it just looks bad. So the space is really kind of for aesthetic reasons, which is a lot of writing styles do that for aesthetic reasons. But, okay. So one thing, okay, sorry. That's your annotated bibliography assignment. One thing I didn't show, but what I'm going to do, this is all kind of going to go together, is, let me make sure I'm not missing anything down here. I do have one thing on the annotated bib that I want to show you. Grading annotated bibs is a very, like grading essays has its own issues, but grading annotated bibs is really difficult because it feels like a very robotic type of grading. So what I've done in the past is I come up with grading notation for annotated bibs, and I will probably use this to some extent, but I'll give it to you because it gives you an idea. It's not a rubric, but it's kind of like a rubric. You know, I of course have number 1 as the argument is not identified. So I, in the past, have required my students to integrate a quotation that is the argument. You do not have to do that. I strongly encourage you to do that. And that's because you want to justify that what you're stating is the argument. And if we go back to looking at the sample, you can see every sentence in his article, the author argues that blah, 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 the citation. Same thing up here, right? In blah, blah's article, they argue this, quotation, citation. Every single one has this. In the article, blah, 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 quotation, citation. So, and that's just a very effective way of doing things. It also gets you in the habit of using quotations. But again, it's not a requirement. I just strongly, strongly encourage you to do it. Also because you won't have to find the argument again. You already have found it. The methodology is the part where you discuss like what the author does. So that's part of your summary. Do you have a citation? Sometimes I get annotated bibs that don't have citations, so I've had to include grading for that there is actually a citation. Underdeveloped analysis, so you want to make sure that you have robust analysis. Is your APA correct? And another problem with this rubric has come out of grading annotated bibs, and sometimes where there's underdeveloped analysis, there's overdevelopment in summary. So this is that relying too much on summary and I'm not doing enough analysis. I've already talked about that when I talked about summary and analysis with your rhetorical analysis. But overdevelopment is you're just summarizing. It's like, if I wanted to know this much, I would just read the article. So that's my grading notation. I use this as just kind of a guiding, like, what are the main things I'm looking for in the annotated bib, and the only thing different is the quotation, but again, I strongly encourage you to actually do that. So, circling back really quick to editing and revision, and I'm also going to move on to APA and source integration, is I just wanted to give you an idea. This is just a paper of mine that I had been working on for a really long time. But I I do this is all examples of editing and revision. So I use track changes in Word. If you've never not used it before, I recommend you using it, because it helps, even though you're doing on a computer, it still allows for that reflective revision. So you can still see like, okay, I had this, but I got rid of it. And or I changed this, or I got rid of that, or I changed this. It allows you to see your writing process. So, and this shows you like, here's all the changes that I've made in writing that. And it's very helpful using track changes for reflective revision, because then you can do it on the computer rather than on paper. And I'm just thinking back to what you guys talked about in the how you write. A lot of you talked about writing on a computer. So, but we still want to maintain the reflective revision, which is not I'm just making changes on the computer without being able to really think about cognitively what I'm doing and why I'm making those changes. So the track changes function in Word, and there is a version of it in Google Docs if you ever write in Google Docs, that still allows for reflective revision to happen. And it's easy and it's faster, obviously, because I think I'm guessing the majority of us are faster typers than we are writers, though you never know. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to do it with this one. I'll do that for source integration. I think I'll do it with this paper because it doesn't have there's no comments, so there's not that extra gray bar over here. But I'm going to set up this paper in APA document first, and then what I'm going to do after that is talk about source integration and citation, which is what chapter 21 is about. And I can't emphasize enough that source integration is a very important topic and a very important practice in writing. Doesn't matter what you're writing. But so I'm going to do some APA stuff first, and then I'm going to talk about source integration, and then I'll wrap up this very lengthy video lecture. So, like I said, this is an MLA, so I'm going to change it to APA. So, and what that means is, sorry, my husband was calling me. I have declined him, but and before I do that, actually, and I think to get that rid of me, I need to quit that. I'm going to, you should have you should have the APA manual, but if you don't, wink, wink, you should be using the OWL at Purdue for APA, or use OWL at Purdue in conjunction with your APA manual. The OWL at Purdue, the online writing lab, it's not as comprehensive as your manual, but I'm just using this because I don't have like an overhead projector or an Elmo to show you like from the text. So anyways, the OWL at Purdue, and I'm going to do this for the references list as well to show you, but there's a lot of great information about here. It's exactly what's in your APA manual, so it's just in digital form. And I said it's not comprehensive because they don't include everything on the OWL at Purdue that they do in the manual. So the thing with one of the great things about the APA is they have the sample paper, which is really helpful if you're wondering what an APA paper looks like. So, and because APA has a cover page followed by an abstract page, and then it gets into the actual paper. So I'm going to set up the title page or the cover page. I'll pretend I have an abstract, and then I'll go into the actual body of the paper. So we don't need this. That's MLA. We don't need it. We have a title here. We don't want any of this on this page. So I'm just gonna push it down, but at least we have a sort of a title so we can pretend what it is. So the first thing we want to do with APA is, and let me make this bigger, and I am doing this on a Word for Mac. It doesn't differ that much from a PC, but if you have questions about doing APA on a PC, please let me know. The first things you have to, or the thing that I always want to point out to people is that a Word document has 3 distinct areas, right? And so you have the header, the body, and then you have down here the footer. These are 3 distinct areas, so it means that whatever changes I make here doesn't affect this. Whatever changes I make in my header, it doesn't affect the body or the footer, etc., etc. So Word sees them as 3 distinct spaces, and that's important because the header for APA is more complicated than the header for MLA, and that's because your first page or your cover page has a different looking header than the rest of your document. So I'm going to get rid of that actually. So, and the header is one thing that people tend to struggle with the most when it comes to APA, but some of the things with APA are, I know we want it to be centered for the title stuff, but right, we need the font size, the margins, the spacing, the headers, the cover page, right? So those are kind of the main things, and then we have the other things like the other things. They're minor. They're not minor. The in-text citation and then the references page. So those are kind of the major things with APA. There's other things, but I'm not going to address them here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the header. If I can get back into, it's not going to let me back in, really. Okay, so layout. It was letting me in there before. There it is. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to do the header. You usually double click in the header area. The cursor changes when you're in the header and footer area. So I don't know why it wasn't letting me. It's still not. So I'll just click in the footer area. My computer is being horrible. Okay, so and then on the ribbon up here in Word, you can see that we have this option for header and footer. The confusing thing about calling it a header is that we don't actually insert a header. We do still call it a header. We're just inserting a page number. So you insert a page number, and if you're on a PC, you would actually do page number and then select plain number 3, because that will automatically put your number over to the right side, which is where you want your number. And the best way to do the running head, it's called the running header for APA, and if just to take you back to the sample paper, whoops, went up too far. You can see that, right, it says running head, and then it has either the whole title, it's not the whole title, it's just part of it in all caps, but on the next page, there's no running head. So the running head part only goes on the cover page, and that's why the first page is different. So you want to do all of this manually because it's just easier and you have more control. So we're going to justify that to the right, and then before I do anything, I'm going to say running head, and then I'm going to put it, we have this part of the whole title won't fit. So what you have to do is just kind of take part of it, and I'm going to take unfavorable effects of smartphone dependency, and then I'm going to put that in all caps. So unfavorable effects of smartphone dependency, and you kind of have to do that. You have to choose, either you have a title that fits there. If it's too long of a title, you just have to choose like a certain amount of words. The other thing that students oftentimes forget is that because there's those 3 distinct spaces. Even though my font, or excuse me, my font here is Times New Roman, it's not up here, so I have to change it to match. So I need that to be Times New Roman. A lot of times it's defaulted at 10, so you have to change it to 12, but mine's already at 12. So once you do that, and the other difference between MLA and APA is that there's no last name that goes on the any of the pages. It's just the title and the title and the page number, and that's a difference between because APA is often used in the social sciences. Normally in composition we would use MLA, so but and that's because APA prefers a more quote unquote objective perspective when it comes to the writing of papers. So they de-emphasize authors, whereas in MLA, it's a much more like this person is writing it. MLA is a much more aggressive type of writing than APA. And then what you're going to do is you're going to space. You're just going to hit the space bar. Space. No, now it's my computer has gone wonkadoo. Space until it jumps off, and then and then that's it. And then it didn't change it. So nothing is working for my APA. Okay, that worked the second time for some reason, but at least it worked. So that's the running head. However, I forgot to do the thing I always forget to do in APA, which I'm guessing I'm not the only one, which is, and it's going to actually delete everything I just did, so I apologize. But if we click on header and footer, we want the different first page to be selected. So now and that's because of that running head. We only want that to be on the first page and everything else. So we're actually going to make two headers. We're going to do the header for the cover page, and then we're going to do the header that's going to go on the rest of the pages. So now I have to go back to inserting the page number, and I just have to repeat everything I just did. So I'm going to put not in caps because that doesn't go in hat. And then I think it's unfavorable, if I remember the topic, effects of smartphone dependency. And then before I space, I want to make sure it's in Times New Roman, and then space until it goes down 1, and then put it back, and then that's done. Okay, so now when I change, starting on page 2, and I just want no running head, I just want the title, we're going to do the spacing again until the number drops down, backspace, and then that's it. So you can see on page 1, I've got the running head, and then on page 2 and all the other pages, that's gone, and I just have the title and the page number. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this because we're going to do our centered information. So it's just 3 lines. It's going to be your name, or the title, your name, and then your institution. So, and you kind of have to, they used to tell you like exactly how many spaces it was, but I haven't been able to find that. So I just eyeball it. So if I go back to the document, so the title is not Sue, use of, it's not even use, unfavorable effects of smartphone dependency. It's a short enough, I think that's the whole title. Nope, on interpersonal relationships. On interpersonal relationships. And then I would put, I'm going to pretend my name is Joe Smith and that I'm at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And then what I do in APA, which is not very common, I don't write in APA, I just teach it, is I'll try to eyeball it. So we know it's size 12, it's Times New Roman. I'm pretty sure the margins they're all 1 inch all around, which is what you want them to be. You can, as the author, you can decide if you want your title to be on 2 lines or not. Maybe you think it looks prettier. It's just up to you. So sometimes a title will go on to 2 lines or more. That's not unusual. I'm just going to leave it all on 1 line for now. And then I'm just going to say that looks good right there. So that's my cover page. It's got the running head up here with the page number, and I've got the 3 bits of information that I need. The next page is the page that has the abstract on it. So again, I'm going to put that down because that would be my actual fake document that I'm pretending that I have right now. And if we go back to the sample paper, you can see that the abstract, right? And it tells you the word abstract should be centered and typed in 12-point Times New Roman. Don't indent the first line of the abstract paragraph. However, all other paragraphs in the paper should be indented, right? So if we had an abstract, which you should for your paper when you're doing actual like research paper, you would say abstract, and then this is where I would start writing my abstract. I wouldn't indent it. No extra space there. And then that's all you would want. So you would just want your abstract on that page. And then on the next page is where your actual paper would start. You do need to restate your title. And then right under that, you start with the actual work itself. So that is kind of a real basic introduction to and you can see here the title just happens to be on 2 lines, and then but the paragraph starts right after that. But that is a very basic introduction to setting up your paper in APA format. But you do need to make sure that you're comfortable with doing that. Okay, so the other thing is at the end, there's not going to be a reference or works cited page. Oh, yeah, and you're going to have to make adjustments for, like, when you have extra, when your pages, if your pages go to double, which yours probably won't. When you do your references page, you do need to start it on a brand new page. So, even if this was the end of my paper and this was all blank, I would still have to start my references on a brand new page. And then you would want that hanging indentation. And the hanging indentation is this here. So here to here. And that's for the reader, not for you, the writer. It's so the reader can very quickly find the source that they want by looking at the last names of the authors. Okay, so I'm going to talk about source integration and citation because that is what chapter 21 is about. And I'm going to I'm trying to think of what I want to use. I might just use this as my paper as an example because I have lots of quotations that I can choose from. And I'll just change it for APA. This is actually an EHRA, which is a British version of MLA. So even my punctuation is wrong. Or it's not wrong, it's just for Britain, not for America. Okay. I'm going to find a quotation that we can, or you know what, let's just keep using the one we've been using because there's easier. My paper is just a disaster. Okay. So, and like I said, I'll just change things for APA as I go, which will help with talking about in-text citations. So when we're talking about source integration, we're talking about quotation, and our author talks about this, paraphrase, and summary. And I actually have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll put on Canvas so you can look through it. I'm not going to click through a PowerPoint presentation, but it goes through like the differences. Quotation is very obvious. It's like it's a direct quotation. Where things get muddied is between paraphrasing and summaries. And I also think these go in the order of easiest to most difficult. Summary is really difficult to do. Paraphrase is mediocre. It's like kind of difficult to do. You just have to know how to do it. And quotation is the easiest, which is why I always recommend it. So if you can stick to quotation, stick to quotation. But it's source integration also has to do with grammatical integration of quotations or evidence. So making sure that the evidence that you're bringing in grammatically flows with the actual, your actual words that lead into it. And so the signposts, or what we call signal posts, I can't remember if I've talked about these before. These are your contextual lead-ins for, I'm just going to say for evidence. Without these, you have an orphan quotation, which means that it's just left all by its lonesome. So you need, that's kind of when we talk about source integration, that's what we're talking about. Source integration is not easy to do. My literature students have been integrating sources since day one. They're still struggling with it. It's not easy to do. It takes practice. You have to be patient with it, and you have to be willing to experiment. So it kind of is going to force you out of your comfort zone. But I'm going to do some highlighting. So the signposts or signal posts, because I do want to bring out what those are. So that's a signpost. So we have a quotation here, which ends here, sorry, past the citation. I'll just put that in blue. And then there's another signpost here. And then we have another quotation here. And then we have another signpost here. And then another quotation here. Why I'm doing this, I'm having questions about things. Like, where's the citation for that? Okay, but that's not the most important thing right now. This paper is old. It was graded a long time ago. Okay, so this is a signpost. So this is a lead into a quotation. So it says, Davis provides the reader with statistics from a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center in 2002, and then there's a quotation. 46% of all American adults now own a smartphone, up a whopping 25% from 2011. Where is this from? Oh, yeah, it's from WebMD. I was going to say it's not written very well. So it's not a lot you see whopping. But, okay, so my first reaction to this is, even though the student did everything they had to do, there's always places to improve, and one of those places is the grammatical integration of the quotation. So if you just, like, as I read that, it's very choppy between the signpost and the quotation. If there was a colon there, it grammatically might make more sense, although it still feels choppy. The one thing you do want to note about APA is that you want to use past tense. It's in this person did it correctly because it was an MLA, which wants present tense. But in APA, you do want to use past tense when you're talking about a text. So Davis provided the reader with statistics from a survey conducted by the Pew, a lot of prepositions in there, sorry, by the Pew Research Center in 2002, comma, and you could say something like stating that, right? Just as something as simple as that would help the grammatical flow of combining or integrating the Davis quotation with the writer's words. It's just a little bit better. So And that was really easy. It's like stating that blah, 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 blah. Okay. The thing I want to point out, so firstly, when we're dealing with this is the in-text citation. So when there's no page number here because this is an online source. If I have, okay, I'll go down here to a source that actually has page numbers. Okay, so here we have the signpost, and then we have a quotation, and then a citation. Okay, in an APA in-text citation, there are 3 things that need to go there if possible. You have the last name or names if there's more than one. You have a comma, you have the year that it was published, and then you have the P dot, which stands for page, and then you have the page number or numbers that go with it. So again, whereas APA has a more complicated header, APA has more complicated in-text citations than MLA. Here they just need the page number. But if you were quoting this, right, and this is actually three people, and I believe you would need to give all of those names. I think the rule is 5 or more is where you can do the et al. But you can see in-text citation author or authors. Here's a work by 3 to 5 authors. List all the authors in the signal phrase. Yep, I was right. I can't believe I remembered that. And then in subsequent citations. So first time you use all between 3 and 5, and then follow that et al. It's Latin for and others. And then once you hit 6 or more authors, you just always use et al. So we know that we need, sorry, I'm like, how do I close this? For here, right, we need all 3 of these people. I'm going to just copy and paste. However, you do use ampersands in the APA citations. You don't use ampersands in APA if you're actually doing like this, which is where you're talking about them. In the citation, though, you do use the ampersand. We don't need the possession there. And then we would want the year. The year for this is 2014. And then we'd want a P dot 194. So that would be an APA citation, except I would want this to say argued, right? Because I'd want it to be in the past tense. But then I would have my APA citation there. Because you could get away with just this or even just that because of the genre of the annotated bibliography. Because this is an annotation that is talking just about one source, your reader's not questioning where your quotations are coming from. So you can leave out the author or authors and the year and just use the page numbers for quoting and source integration in APA. If that for your annotated bibliography, if you choose the site. But once you get to writing the longer papers, I'll provide more detailed explanation on when to use what in APA citations because it's kind of a complicated hierarchy of what to do. So the source integration, again, the most important things, I'm going to go back up to where I was writing, right? The most important things for source integration is that you first choose a quotation that is relevant and that is helpful for your argument, whatever it is your argument. It's actually working for you. It's demonstrating something. Then you actually have to integrate it. And that doesn't mean just putting it in there. You also have to grammatically integrate it to make sure that it flows well, so that you're connecting the other people's voice with your own voice. Making sure that you have those signposts and signal posts that provide a contextual lead-in so your writer or excuse me, your reader knows this is why you're giving me this outside information. You don't just want to drop a quotation in and expect your reader to understand. That's not the job of the reader. That's the job of the writer. And then the last one of the also most important things is to provide analysis of the evidence to point back to the larger claim in both the paragraph. And this is going out a little outside of the annotated bib, but it's also relevant to the annotated bib because you need to be doing that analysis / evaluation. But you can't just put a quotation in and then be like, moving on. No, I'm just going to talk about something that has nothing to do with this quotation that I just put in, right? You have to say, here's the quotation. It's grammatically integrated. It's really pretty. But now I'm going to unpack that quotation to demonstrate to my reader how it in fact is working for the larger claim. That is also difficult to do, and it's also something that people struggle with because it's not easy to do. So you have to make sure that the time you spend doing doing analysis of those quotations, you're spending the time that you need to be spending the time doing that. Okay, that is a lot of stuff that I'm throwing at you right now. I'm trying to see down here if there's anything I didn't show you. This is the workshop PowerPoint that I'll give to everybody. That's just about bibliography examples. I've gone through everything. So, nope, just kidding. Okay, so that's everything I have for now. For just to briefly look at Module 5 again, which is what you should be finishing up this week. You've got a lot of these little exercises that are specific to avoiding plagiarism and in-text citation and references. It's really all about integrating sources, the annotated bibliography assignment, and then that revision of the peer review paper. So, not the paper, but the peer review paragraphs, the summary and analysis, right? The summary and the strong response. So, I hope I've addressed everybody's issues that people have been having with the peer review assignment. But if you're still having issues with that, please let me know. Otherwise, feel free to contact me about anything, and I will be talking to you guys soon. Okay, bye.